Monster Train is a game developed by Shiny Shoe Studios, a small team working in San Francisco, released on the 22nd of May, 2020. The first expansion was released in March of this year. It is a roguelike deck builder that wears its inspirations on its sleeves, but manages to create its own niche through creature-focused gameplay. The setup is that hell is frozen over, and you're on a train protecting the last bastion of it from angels. Despite the demonic theme, the cards and creatures have flashy and colorful effects, and are all realized through excellent visual design. I've played Monster Train for about 50 hours, and have seen just about everything there is to offer. It's a solid deck-building experience, let down by a few design decisions that make it less than the sum of its parts. It falls into the pitfall that many of the genre fall into. A required critical mass of synergy is required for a functional deck, but it is luck-based whether you actually reach that quantity. Compounding this is that you have to pick from 2 of the game's 6 classes at the start of each run, and your cards found are divided between those. There is a definite lack of cohesion between the classes, and I wish that I could just pick a singular class and stick to it. That's not to say there aren't positives. The 3-tier system offers different strategic options, and the focus on creature summoning rather than spells or buffs reminds me more of Hearthstone than Slay the Spire. There is also a large variety, with over 200 cards divided between the 6 clans and a few neutral cards. Overall, the game is very solid, and I'd recommend it to fans of the genre, but it's a step down from the best. Monster Train began development as one of 4 prototypes, where the sub-teams of Shiny Shoe tried to create the idea for their next game. Initially it was a generic medieval theme, with orcs and soldiers. Once it was decided on as the project going forward, there were several iterations on the theme, including one that was combating an undead horde. Throughout development, a few key facets stood clear: a 3-leveled fighting arena and creature-based cards. A huge focus during development was rapid changes, with a few different methods to help in that regard. The first was in-game bug reporting, rather than using third-party software. During the private beta phase, there were almost daily updates, and continuous feedback was both given and received by the team. This was part of a larger goal of creating a community for the game, helping to establish organic growth and a longer tail for sales. One major focus of this was a community Discord server, where new cards were previewed, and weekly developer streams allowed direct communication. There are 2 parts to the game: battle and exploration. Battle is the main meat of the game. There are 3 levels of the train where you place creatures and cast spells to stop waves of heavenly forces. After each round of combat, enemies move up 1 floor, eventually reaching the top and damaging the pyre in a design similar to tower defense games. At the end of each encounter, a boss enemy spawns, and instead of just having 1 round of attacks, each unit fights to the death. There are a few potential encounters in each floor, and there are bosses with unique mechanics on floors 3, 6, and 8. In between each of these fights, there is a power-up phase, where the player encounters a variety of random boons like stores, artifacts, and random encounters. There is a choice of 2 routes in each, giving the player some influence over their boons. There is still a large degree of randomness, however. Only being able to choose between 2 units when acquiring new ones, or 3 artifacts, mean there are times when even after looking for a specific type of unit for a full run, there won't be any available. One thing that the game does well is the visceral feel of combat. Though it can be hard to see specific effects if the game speed is turned up, which I recommend, the explosions of damage offer good visual and auditory feedback, and the final blow on a boss has a nice slowdown effect. Both spells and attacks from characters are designed to have the player feel engaged in the content. When creating new content, they worked from bottom-up design. First, we would add cards and units to the game based purely on play mechanics. No thought was put into the visuals at all at this point. The focus was solely on making the gameplay interesting. Then, after playtesting, if we thought the gameplay was solid, we'd have our writer come up with a concept for what it should look like, and what the lore should be to make it fit within the overall game world. While this is certainly the most efficient from a time design standpoint, there's certainly an impact felt in the lore of the game. There is an option turned off by default that enables lore text on the cards and artifacts in the game, and it feels very secondary to everything else that is happening. Though several of the factions feel very hellish and contribute to the theme, others just seem like fantasy races. That's not to say the designs are bad, they are far from it, they just feel out of place. The audio is good, but nothing memorable or worth noting. The music is suitably adventurous, with a fair number of tracks, about 30, including the various menu and event themes. Due to how an experienced player can move through the game, however, they often transition fairly abruptly, as options are chosen quickly, and transitions are clicked through. The sound effect for both the spells and creatures are solid, and help contribute to the exciting atmosphere the game is trying to create. The art style itself is very good. Despite the significant variety of both foes and friends, including demons, merfolk, and plant monsters, it is all consistent. This was mostly due to the internal style guide, or art bible, which gave clear rules, and the volume in art is significant for a team of around 2. There's some duplication of assets with minor changes, but that is understandable and fits within the army story the game is trying to tell. As for the story itself, there is no meta-narrative explaining the repeated attempts, but that's not something to expect, as it is only really Hades that has done it successfully, and maybe Returner. Each run is a retelling of the story of Hell taking down Heaven's angels, and that's fine. Player's story is more interesting here, as once they've done a few runs, they know what to hope for, certain upgrades or cards that will suit their build. The starting pool for each faction is limited, but as more runs are done, the potential options are increased significantly. Monster Train released at a time when card games, both deck builders and collectible card games, are at an all-time high. Slay the Spire is certainly the most prominent, but others like Rogue Book by Magic's Richard Garfield and Griftlands have all come out within the last few years. Although we don't have exact sales numbers, Shiny Shoe has been very happy with its performance, with an all-time peak of 14,000 players, very solid for an indie game with a niche genre. For comparison, Slay the Spire has a peak of 32,000, and most other games are half that or less. Since releasing Monster Train, Shiny Shoe has released one DLC expansion, as well as 3 mini updates, adding mod support, as well as custom mutators to further enhance the differences between runs. There's been no hint yet of what their next game is, but I will be watching them with interest. Overall, Monster Train is a very good deck builder. It has a large variety of both cards and factions, snappy gameplay, and is a very good way to spend a few hours. The game is let down by some unintuitive design elements, lackluster story, and a bit too much randomness, but still emerges as one of the better examples of the genre. I give it 3.5 stars out of 5. I'm Joseph Barber, and I hope you've enjoyed this review.